Welcome, everybody, to Going Remote, How to Be Successful on a Remote Broadcast. My name's Dave Goren, Executive Director of the NSMA, and glad to be joined today by three industry vets. Ken Neal, longtime producer and director. Ken and I, we've met each other at various, usually media hospitality rooms, because he's always out in the truck.
Yep.
Along the way, covering the ACC mainly. Tom Werme, ACC play-by-play guy, Fox Sports South, Raycom, some other history as well, and we'll get into that. And Ben Leber, Ben and I have never met, never talked, so Ben, good to meet you, and thank you for doing this. Ben, former K-State footballer, and now does college football, and you have remote experience with FS1, correct?
Correct, yep.
All right, so since you're the newest guy, probably the youngest guy, why don't you go ahead, tell us a little bit about your story and your path, and then a little bit about working these remote broadcasts.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. Pretty special time. Ken, always good to see you. So my story, boy, oh boy, nothing crazy. Let's see here. Grew up a little bit in Iowa and South Dakota, small town kid. The biggest town I lived in was just under 10,000 people. So small town guy, played collegiately at Kansas State as a linebacker, played all my 5 years there, and then was drafted by the San Diego Chargers in the third round in 2002. Played there for 4 years, the Vikings for 5 years, 1 year in St. Louis, all as a linebacker. So got 10 years in the NFL, retired after the 2011 season, and just kind of went into sports broadcasting locally. Got an opportunity with FSN doing not only high school football but some college football, and then now I'm the radio sideline reporter for the Minnesota Vikings flagship station, and contribute to the KFAN broadcast during the week here locally for iHeartMedia. So yeah, I'm just dabbling, man. I'm just trying to find my way in college and professional football, and wherever I can fit in, I'll get in.
How many remote Remy's have you done?
Quite a bit. Yeah, quite a bit. I would say probably eight to 10 remotes. More so this last year and the last couple of years than before. So it's funny because it seems like it's a bigger deal than what it actually is. And now that I've gone through it a few times, it really isn't as challenging maybe as you think on paper, and the way they kind of lay it out for you before you get to your game and really the course of the week. I would say the biggest thing with remotes is that I think there's a little bit more communication that has to happen during the course of the week with producers, directors, just making sure that we're really all on the same page. And, I think it's going to be doing more stuff like this, Zoom calls, telephone calls, just to make sure that since we can't meet in person, you really got to make sure that those all those little side stories and all the little ways that the game could unfold, everybody's on the same page. So really, once the game starts, it's the same thing. It's the same feel. There might be a little bit of a delay by about a half a second, but once you get over that, it's a normal broadcast.
Thank you. Tom Werme, before I get to you, I just want to make sure we thank Greater Winston-Salem, Inc., who is a sponsor of the NSMA Continuing Ed series, so thank you to them. Tom, your story.
Let's see, Dave. Very, very, very humble beginnings at perhaps the smallest television station in the United States back in 1991. So and I worked a little bit prior to that in Syracuse while I was a student. So I'm in my 30th year of broadcasting, and I've done just about everything I could possibly ever get my hands on. And I've been lucky enough to just kind of come down to this area in the mid-2000s to work for the Charlotte Bobcats. That'll tell you how far back I go. And from day one, when I got down here, I was lucky enough to work with Ken Neal. So I've known Ken as a colleague and friend for many, many years. And just kind of made inroads and networking since I came down here in 2004. And was able to work with the Southern Conference, and through that get to the ACC and Fox Sports South and Raycom Sports. And again, it's just Raycom needed somebody in a pinch back in 07 or 08, and I'm still working for them now in 2020. And I've been really lucky in that regard to be able to come down to this area and stay here and know that this is where I wanted to work out of, and hopefully stay here for many years to come. I'm originally from Massachusetts, and I worked all over New England and Pennsylvania, but when I got down here, I knew this was a second home, and now it's a first home here in Fort Mill, South Carolina. My son's in college down at USC. My daughter's probably not far behind him. So we've really put down roots here, and I acknowledge all the fantastic people who work so hard behind the scenes and make everything come together, because I don't care what event you're at, is always a Herculean effort behind it, from 10 people, 100 people, 500 people, whatever it is. There's very, very hardworking people behind the scenes and next to me and trying to make me look as good as possible, and that's not an easy thing to do.
How much experience with Remy's for you?
So the very first one I ever did was probably 3 or 4 years ago. It was a basketball game. It was Ole Miss against Virginia Tech. And Buzz was the head coach of Virginia Tech, and he needled us at the end of the game for not being there. That was my first experience. It was myself and Jason Capel, who had been the head coach at App State and worked with us at Raycom and Fox. And but I found it very challenging, because normally, especially with basketball, you've got an incredible view from courtside. And even if you're up a few rows, there are some arenas where we work about halfway up the bowl, and it's still a very good view. But there's no replacement for being courtside. And I found it very challenging, and lucky enough, I haven't had to do one since, but I was very concerned with player identification and being able to feel the flow of the game. And the key for me, and what I've done subsequently, is down at Fox Sports South, I've worked out of their studios, and we've done a lot of Olympic events, soccer and volleyball primarily, and those have been fantastic. And the key for me really is not so much the visual, because they provide us with an enormous monitor and everything we would ever need, but the audio mix in the headsets, as far as my own voice, the analyst's voice, and whatever natural sound from the event. I need those three things to be perfectly calibrated. This is just for me now, to do my absolute best. If those three things are on point, honestly, everything else just kind of falls into place. But I do find Remy events very challenging as far as not being there, and I rely a lot on the feel of the event and being there. And Ken will tell you this, I thrive on that, and it's hard to replicate that when you are not there. Although if it's the next best thing, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know if there are going to be games, really, until we start, if we ever do. Ken, you're the veteran of Remy's, I guess. Hundreds, is that accurate? Hundreds of remote events? And actually, if you're in the truck, you're always remote, right?
Yeah. But I mean, the mobile truck environment is certainly where we're most comfortable. But since probably 2012, I mean, we did the Olympics for NBC in New York. That was a Remy style production back in 2012, and really since that iteration, once the Olympics proved that they could be done that way, everybody else kind of jumped on board. So I would say I've been involved for the last 8 years, and every year I'm doing at least 20 to 25.
A lot of international, mainly soccer, correct?
It can be soccer, but as Tom said, we've done volleyball. We've done men's and women's collegiate soccer that way. We've done, with Ben, the FS1 games out of the FS1 facility in Charlotte. Major League Soccer, almost 90% of Fox's coverage on the MLS is done this way, with the announcers on site and the production back in a control room, in Charlotte or Los Angeles. 2 World Cups we've done this way. So, there's really nothing that's exempt, to be honest with you, because the technology and now the cloud technology is such to where, you can do these with, as Ben said, if you've got quality communication leading up to the event and you're just really disciplined about your technical check-ins and everything, any of these sports are capable of being done this way. And I can 100% assure you that going forward, more will be done.
I mean, first of all, it was a cost-saving measure. Now it's a health issue as well. Talk to me and maybe talk me through what, Ken, your pregame is like for one of these. And let's just say, for instance, a college football game.
Okay. And there are various, I think, part of the conversation here needs to be the language of what we're talking about. So, under ESPN's auspices, they call them Remy's. Under Fox's auspices, they call them at-home productions or home run productions. You can have, under ESPN's jurisdiction, like a full Remy or what they call a Remy 2, where the announcers are on site. So the language of what you're doing is sort of the first step here. So you might have the announcers on site. You may have the announcers in a control room situation, which is what Tom was talking about with the facility in Atlanta. Or what's going to happen going forward is you may have the announcers, and this is happening right now relative to the Bundesliga shows, is the announcers are actually at home. So they're not even traveling for the games. So those are kind of the 3 pieces of the puzzle. In terms of the preparation relative to just say college football, I think, as Ben said, the communication leading up is 99% of it. Just interacting with your analyst and your play-by-play person, almost on a daily basis, because you're trying to arrange for coaches' calls. In the college football infrastructure, at least so far, most of the time the play-by-play and the analyst are on site. So they still have, that ambience that Tom talked about, the feel for the game, what's happening in the stands when there were fans, interacting with players pregame on the field. So all of that preparation for me, if the game is on Saturday, and Ben can kind of weigh in on this, we actually start it like when the game is concluded. Like when we finished the game on the previous Saturday, we actually have maybe a 5 or 10 minute conversation just to say, okay, next week we're going to be here. Kind of what's your guys' schedule Sunday, Monday, so that, we can just get a feel for when people are available to try to do the calls. And then I've already worked with the SIDs of these schools probably a month in advance, or at least 3 weeks in advance, to let them know, hey, our guys in this infrastructure, our talent will actually be on site, but I'll be in a facility in Charlotte. And so like something as simple as your depth chart, which you're used to getting, in the press room or whatever before game, I have to get a digital copy of that sent to me as soon as I possibly can for graphic production and that type of thing. And because I'm reaching out so much earlier, the storylines that we, are going to look at we're already identifying those way ahead of time. And I might even have a conversation with Ben 3 weeks before a game starts to say, hey, I just want to put this on your radar, and then we just kind of monitor it as the games progress. And then if it's something that's still pertinent, then we've got graphic design or video elements that we need to do. And I can say, for the games that Ben and I did last year, I probably had, kind of in my back pocket, 50 elements between graphics, like full screen graphics, player packages, historical flashbacks, that type of thing. So the preparation for the game, I would have had similar preparation if I was in the truck environment, but because I don't, the control room facility isn't as nimble necessarily as a mobile unit environment, you really have to kind of have all your ducks in a row. If the game's on Saturday, you kind of almost have to be ready to go by Thursday, so that when you do have a set day, which we still do in these situations for college football, we're able to build and make sure that we've got everything, ready to go. And then we would have a conversation, typically Ben and whoever the play-by-play person was, they would do coaches conversations on Friday in person. And then we would just, usually on Friday night, we would have a conference call just to make sure if there was any roster changes or anything like that we needed to review. And then I might have a separate conversation with Ben either later that night or in the morning on Saturday, again, just to say, this just broke, or here's something, new. And then, as Ben will tell you too, the biggest thing, and he was great about this, is just getting to the field early, because you're still in a college football environment, more so than in college basketball or some of the other sports, your rehearsal time in these REMI situations is really critical. You've got technical rehearsals to make sure all of that is in place, and then reviewing all the graphic options that we have, the video roll-ins, and making sure that you do all that in a timely fashion so that the announcers have time, a little bit of time to themselves, and also time to get to the field. Because that, I think, to Tom's point, you just, even if it's 20 minutes, just being able to talk to the quarterback or the point guard or an assistant coach or just any type of that interaction just gives you a little bit extra as you head into the broadcast.
Yeah, and I'll jump in too. As Tom was kind of talking about his situation, I've never done a game off of a monitor. So, when Ken is talking about the different variations of being remote, the only experience I have is being on site minus producer, minus the director, and minus the mobile truck. It's usually play-by-play guy, myself, and then some sort of runner or intermediary that's sent from Fox that's like, all right, they're going to get you guys to and from the facilities for the coaches' meetings on Friday, make sure that you're all set up. So it becomes a much smaller group that kind of travels around on Thursday night and Friday when you get on site. I honestly can't imagine doing a game, and I know we may have to, and probably have to do it this year, but calling a game from a monitor without the ambiance and without that environment is going to be very, very difficult. I mean, as Tom was saying, you need to feel the game. And I know it's on us as broadcasters to give the fans that natural enthusiasm, that natural energy. And I think sometimes when it comes off as as forced. It comes off as, it's interpreted as kind of fake, and I think the audience can feel that. It's a really delicate balance of, you're going to have to bring the juice. Even the players on the field, we were talking about it this morning, even on our own radio show. What's it going to look like with the NFL or college, and how are these players going to prepare when they walk into a stadium, and one city and state may have different capacity rules versus another, and they're going to have to make adjustments every week. They may go out to a field on game day and there's no fans at all, and they're going to have to prepare to bring that juice no matter what, and treat it like a practice environment, whether it is a very sterile environment. And that's going to be the same thing for us. Unfortunately, the thing for us as broadcasters, football, we're not going to get that practice time. We don't get a preseason. We basically, the first game that's broadcast, we got to be ready to go. And so it's going to be different and difficult, I think, in the first quarter of the season, just to know what that feels like. And, fingers crossed, we don't have to actually cross that bridge too often. But, as Ken was saying, the communication that has to take place, I would say from the technical side, was probably the biggest hurdle, because whenever the satellite link can go up and they can start the transmissions and all that stuff, when they're on site, as a broadcaster, it seems pretty seamless. We don't understand like a lot of the things that happen, but you're much more aware of it on a remote broadcast because we have to test all the equipment much earlier. There seems to be at times a little bit more of a problem solving in game. Somebody's mic might go out and we might have to go to a backup mic, and it's like, you just got to be ready to move. And so it can take you out of your game a little bit, but as long as you're prepared to talk about all the things that could go wrong, and you prepare for that on the front end, much like anything else, preparation is key. And it may seem a little clunky and it may seem kind of overwhelming. Like, I have to prepare for this game and get everything I need to get done with players and film watching and all this stuff, coaches. And also I have to be ready for all these other secondary preparations of, what if the mic goes out? What if this headset goes out? What if we lose communication with Ken? What if we do this? And so you have to have those conversations just in case they happen.
One of the things we talked about on our very first Zoom session a couple months ago now was, we were talking play-by-play, and several of our play-by-play people said, seating for media has changed over the last decade or so, especially where, at Boston Garden, a basketball, or whatever it's called now, they're way behind the baseline in the corner, but we can't complain about any of this, right, Tom Werme?
Well, no, I just want to be there. I mean, Ken knows, anybody who's ever done a game, been in a game, called a game, it's just it is so much easier. And luckily, as I said, it's only been those Olympic sports that I've really had to do on a consistent basis, and that was out of the studio at Fox Sports South. And again, they gave us all the things that we needed to pull that broadcast off, but there's still the challenge of even the smallest little things that come up, like, we're doing a volleyball game and something happens and the referee makes a questionable call. I could just ask somebody at the arena, if it hasn't been, you have to think of these things beforehand, stuff you take for granted when you're at the location, when you're on site. And if there's a player, we had this happen, there was a number for a player and not on the roster that we were given. Now, if you're there, you can just have somebody run over to the bench and talk to somebody, or sports information person. But, if it happens while you're in the middle of a remote broadcast like that, it's hard to recover, and it's hard to cover up. I had to do it for a little while. So you're talking about other things and that kind of stuff. And I'm on the talk back while I'm listening to the analyst, and we're trying to put out that little fire, but those things can come up. So like Ben said, you got to be prepared for different sort of challenges that come along with those remote broadcasts, whether you're the announcers on site, whether you're in a studio somewhere. So it took a little bit getting used to, but as I said, for those Olympic sports where technically you're just kind of going back and forth, and football is the same, but it's a little more intricate with the amount of players and the involvement of those players, whereas a soccer game has a certain pace to it. and a volleyball game is just rapid fire. So you're able to kind of handle those situations the more you do those. So I've become accustomed to those, but I cannot imagine having to do a football game that way. Some of my colleagues have had to do baseball and softball that way. So I'm really just kind of looking at, whenever I watch television now, mentally I'm going through those repetitions, be it golf, football, baseball, so whatever replay is on. And luckily, a lot of our football games have actually been replayed on Fox, and I'll kind of go in and out and watch those a little bit and say, well, that situation might have been a challenge if I was in a studio, or how would I have handled that in studio as opposed to on site? So I'm already in that mental frame of mind to perhaps having that situation present itself where we're not on site at a football game, which from what I understand right now, we're on schedule, and I hope everything works out great and we are actually there. But I'm already in that mental frame of mind, and I'm thinking about those things right now. And again, I just want to stress the support that we get in all situations from folks in the truck. Like, I've worked with Ken Neal for so long now that he doesn't count me in. He doesn't say we're coming on. I can tell from just the tone of his voice or lack thereof what's going to happen. And for me, that is such a huge comfort when I work with people like Ken or other folks that I've worked with over the years. I'm lucky in that regard. There's some built-in trust and anticipation on both sides that in those situations, we can anticipate things and try to get around those potential pitfalls, but they are going to happen. And it's very helpful to have someone who I've worked with for many, many years. And now I've been in so long in the Atlanta-Charlotte corridor that I've worked with just about everybody. So I feel good in that regard. Hope we're on site. If we're not, we'll make it work.
If everybody has or anybody has questions, you can either use your hand raise icon or shoot me a chat message there. Ken, let's say basketball. Most crews are used to, broadcast crews or on-air guys are used to sitting courtside or close enough where if there is an official's call that's weird, the officials will come over to the table and they'll brief them on that. Let's say it's being done from the studio. Do you need extra comms in the production area so you can relay that message, or the officials can come over and do that?
The good news is that, and we, it's a little weird, but with the ACC network, if you're doing, so let's say you're doing women's college basketball at Carolina, which is in Carmichael, your production control room is at the Smith Center. So in a sense, you're still in a remote environment. And the good thing is that the comm infrastructure takes so much less bandwidth, relative to what we call these muxing devices that allows us to get audio and video back to these to control room facilities. That you can have, your timeout coordinator would still be a point-to-point relative to your comm system. So, per the ACC's requirement, there still is a headset at that timeout coordinator's position for the referee. Now, it's a little, it used to be the referee would come and talk to us, individually. Now with DB Sport being a part of the mix for most conference infrastructures, we don't have to deal too much with replay issues. But if there was, something that had to be addressed from an announcer standpoint, that could either be communicated by the timeout coordinator, or if we got a timeout situation, the referee could put on the headset and I could communicate with them directly.
All right, we have some questions. Let's start with Kai, since he's all the way over in Germany. Unmute yourself, Kai.
Actually, I don't have a question right now.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's not Kelly Burke. How about you?
I do have a question. This is for all three of you. How do you anticipate, assuming that we all are fully remote for our broadcasts, how do you anticipate the prep will be different as far as the conversations go with coaches, with regards to the access you're getting? And I'll give you some context. So when I work as an analyst in basketball, I find that I get my best nuggets at shoot around, or even right before the game. I'll have coaches come and tell me lineup changes or injuries or last minute stuff, or even when I'm doing sidelines for football, I tend to visit with the head coaches during pregame. I'll just go up and say hi really quick, and sometimes they tell me stuff or they'll give me little interesting tidbits. So because we would potentially not be on site, how do you think you can still create sort of that access and get those nuggets when you're not having those conversations in person?
Well, I would say, unfortunately, I think some of that stuff we're just not going to have access to, in my estimation. I think it's going to come down to us, me personally, if we have to go through this. Really tapping on the SIDs early. Maybe more so than I did last year, and in the years before. But just really letting them know, as they will, they're gonna know that we're going to be remote and all that other stuff. But just letting them know that, hey, anything a little extra you can give us, as far as nuggets, late breaking news, maybe things that you didn't want to tell us during the course of the week, but maybe you can tell us up to kickoff. Just really letting them know that you can trust us. We're obviously here to help you guys out too, but you got to help us out even more, and we need a little bit more from you guys. And I think that's going to be the hard part, because I'm with you. I like going down in the field, and especially if I've developed a little bit of a relationship with some of the coaches, just from the history and all that stuff, you do get certain little nuggets about players. And maybe it's not big news, but it might be like, yeah, he's one of our best players, but, we didn't put on the injury report, but he's got a little bit of a banged up ankle, and maybe that you can weave that in without really giving anything away, but just saying like, yeah, I kind of heard that he's maybe not 100%, and that's about that. So I think we are going to miss out on that. And I think that is one of the things that the networks are going to have to weigh, is how important are those little nuggets, are those personal stories, and all those little things that add to the broadcast that aren't going to be there. So it's going to come down to just more and more prep being done during the course of the week, more communication being done. And as you guys all know, coaches they're not going to be communicating via text or anything like that moments before a game, even an hour or two before a game. They're dialed in, and so to even text those guys and say, hey, do you have anything for us? Most likely they're not going to get back to you. So I think it's going to fall down to the SIDs and any sort of personal relationships that maybe you've developed over your history.
Anybody else want to tackle that one? Tom, Ken?
I would agree. I'd agree completely. And the other thing is that when you're in a face-to-face meeting with coaches and players, it's so different than a phone call, which is fine. That's great. And you get a little bit out of that. But when you're face-to-face, and I'll reference our conversations with Mac Brown this year. We did 4 of their games. And the difference between our conversation between the first time we sat down with him, when he was the home team, and say the second or third time when they were the home team, because we visit with the home team's coaches and players in person, and the visiting team will do a conference call with midweek, late week, whatever. That's just the format that we utilize. But the difference between the way he talked to us, and he was great the whole time, don't get me wrong, but the difference from the way he talked to us the first time we sat down with him to the second or third, I mean, it's like you were family with him, and he just kept asking us, what else can I give you? And obviously he has more of a perspective on being on the broadcast side of it now as well, as opposed to the coach's side. So he was very forthcoming and very helpful, but it's developing those relationships that'll be impeded a little bit. In fact, a lot, if you're not able to sit down with coaching staffs. And most of the time, people like Ken and our producers and directors will be in on those calls as well, Ken, and meetings.
Yeah, and I would just say, and I tell a lot of people who are just getting into this business this often, you can't shortcut the work. And so, like in your situation, Kelly, like if you're doing college basketball and your season normally starts the 1st of November or your conference schedule starts in January, every coach in America right now is available. And Tom will tell you, I've been fortunate enough to build a pretty good Rolodex. And you just have to use it. Like you got to hustle it now, because it'll be a lot easier then if you've taken the time now to reach out, even if it's, just cursory conversations with people that you met before, to when you get in a situation, if you're not there on site, to be able to text them early in the week or early in the day or pick up the phone. They'll be a lot more responsive at that point if you start now.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Thank you. Matt Krause, you have a question.
Yes, I do. Thanks so much, Dave. Ken, Ben, and Tom, thanks so much for doing this today, guys. This is a pretty specific question for Tom. When you call an Olympic sport such as a volleyball or
Oops, you went out on us, Matt.
I heard the volleyball part.
or soccer, check 1 2. You got me?
Start again. Now we have.
Yeah, repeat.
Okay. Tom, when you're calling, say, a soccer or a volleyball off of a monitor, do you find yourself looking at the program feed more often than you would be when you're calling it in person, or are you looking at kind of the high center, all 22 feed, for lack of a better term?
You know what's funny is that we have 2 giant monitors in front of us, and Ken's laughing because he knows what I'm going to say. And I like to have the program monitor, what the people at home are watching, as big as possible right in front of me, because I want to see the numbers. To me, identification of players is absolutely the first thing, foremost, top of the list, and then the proper pronunciation of said name of that player. And the one thing that, everybody makes mistakes during their broadcasts, and you make choices and you wish you went different ways at times. But to me, as long as I get the names and numbers correct, that's the most important thing to me. So I will say, and I've said this every time I've had to do one of these remote broadcasts out of a studio, is that give me the program right in front of me as big as possible. And I can see the bug too, because that's another thing. I rely on the bug also a lot, especially in volleyball. And I'm glad you asked this. In volleyball, it goes so fast and the motions are so quick sometimes that you're not quite sure who just got that last point. And I rely on the bug folks. And as long as you say the same thing that is on the bug at the moment, which I'm talking about the score and the time and what have you, then you're all on the same page. And in that remote situation, I will certainly rely on that and watch it change. I'll keep track of it. But for the most part, I am really glued to that giant monitor television in front of me. And ironically, you should have a very high percentage of observation of that monitor during a broadcast if you were in fact there. I had a situation last year. We did a football game on site on Saturday. I got right out of there, went to Syracuse, did a live volleyball game that next day on Sunday, and then Monday or Tuesday we were doing remote soccer from the studio in Atlanta. And I was trying to keep consistent with the usage of the monitor. It's very important, because you can be talking about something, and unless you've alerted your technical crew to the fact that you're going to talk about that, you may be talking about something that is not being shown on the monitor, and now we're chasing it. What we're trying to do is avoid that. And things happen very fast. I understand that. And with Ken, all I got to do is say a couple of words as I pause in a sentence to Ken, and he knows where I will be going. Again, that goes back to the trust factor and familiarity. But yes, when I do those remotes in a studio, I am locked on that monitor 90% of the time, and the only other percent is just to keep score or make a note or make eye contact with my analyst.
Excellent. Thank you.
Lincoln Rose, you want to go, if you're already unmuted, go ahead.
Thanks, Dave. Past few years, just to put it in perspective, I've been lucky to have about a third of my schedule, and it's a situation where the analyst and I are not on site. We're back in the studio. We have our 2 monitors, program being one, and as much as I love the idea of seeing every single camera on the other, in reality, you don't reference it unless you're in a panic. Wanted to reassure Ben real quick, if you ever do analyst responsibilities in the studio, you'll be fine with the energy. Just the same way you get lost watching a television show or movie on your TV, you and your play-by-play guy will get dialed in. But a question for Ken and Tom in terms of, I don't like to meddle with my directors very often, but from the remote format, I'll ask them, soccer, please linger on the hero shot a little bit longer. So if there's a big mass after a goal, we can make sure we can pick out who it was that scored rather than cutting away. If I don't have a first down marker in football, try to get the far sideline so I can at least see respective to where that first down marker might be. Or in baseball or softball, you want to see the umpires at every base in case there was a double play. But can you think of similar little nuances there, Ken or Tom, that you're asking of your director in that regard, framing of shots that are going to help you with split-second identification and just staying as accurate as possible?
I can talk to the soccer piece of it because I do it 100 times a year. The other biggest thing relative to that is just your offside flag. So oftentimes, the play will happen, and I try to get the referees, the near and far side linesmen, to keep their flags up. If they know we're in a remote situation, especially at the college level, I'll try to interact with them before the game somehow to say, hey, just so you know, we're not on site. If you guys can just keep your flag up a little bit longer. Who's taking the corner? Oftentimes, again, at the collegiate level, the light levels in most of these venues drops off in the corner areas. So it just, I'm really sensitive to that piece of it. And, most of the time, the person who's taking the corner is going to take it consistently. So once you've seen it one time, that person's back there most of the other time. And then to your point again, relative to the hero piece of it on the goal score, we do try to linger on who scored it, or we try to get to the replay quick. Again, sometimes the camera operators may not know, and I can kind of sense that as the play is developing. So when the ball goes in the net, if I can tell that they don't know who scored it, even though I'm telling them who scored it, I'll just get to the replay quick. So when I come off of it, whoever's calling the game will have, a shot quick enough to kind of put a button on that particular story.
Yeah, just to say that the goal scorers are helpful, obviously, and the corner kicks and the who's serving and that kind of thing. But it's the work with the producer and director, even if we're in a studio situation, it's that I know that they're going to take those shots already. They're just incredibly helpful in that regard. And honestly, if you don't know, there's no reason to speculate or guess. There really isn't. Use the team name or whatever, and we're going to get a better look at it here on the replay. Oh, it was deflected by some. That's totally, it's on TV. People can see it. I don't need to say that might have been 7 or 16. I mean, a lot of times the numbers look very similar on the uniform, 9s and 8s and with 7s and 1s and all that stuff. So, and it happened, people think it doesn't develop quickly, but it really does. And to have somebody who you trust in the truck and directing and producing all that I cannot stress that enough, how important that is. And I know that there are times where you'll work with people that you haven't before, but I was lucky enough during my remotes last year when I did the most of them that it was a person that I worked with before. And there's that anticipatory quality that is just irreplaceable. It really is. And I reference Ken because he's with us, but Ken and I have done, I don't know, hundreds of events together going back to the mid 2000s. So that's important. And we have great people at Fox Sports South for the Olympic events for the ACC as well. And the analysts do a great job too. So we've got so many support people around us, but you're right, those little small things about be able to identify players and who did what and when, all the shots that the directors and producers take and all that is very, very helpful.
If I can follow up, Dave, I do think at this point we recognize body language, and so we kind of get a sense of the things we can't see, and we tend to be correct. But I do remind my analysts, don't paint yourself in a corner on a flag or anything else. We can hold our breath for a moment and see what it winds up being. But
it's TV, absolutely.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Diane Blix, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, guys, I was just thinking about whether you will tell fans that you are remote or not. Like if you're at home or it's obvious that there are no fans in the stands, will you tell them that you aren't on site? Is that a taboo?
That's a good question.
I guess I can. I mean, I'll go first. We went through this with the World Cup in 2015 when Fox initially got it, and for the most part in Canada, we were on site, so it wasn't as much of an issue. When the men's World Cup was in Russia, news got out that we weren't going to be on site except for a couple of announced teams. And there were calls kind of back and forth relative to it. There are some cases where somebody in an executive producer role may say something about that, but for the most part, we've not said one way or another. I mean, we've just come on the air, called the game, and if somebody wants to say, well, they weren't there or whatever, well, then that's kind of up to them. But again, admitting it or not admitting it, I'm a little bit indifferent to it because I think you can do it. I mean, it's been proven that you can do high quality shows and the announcers are not on site. So.
Thank you.
Joe Harrison, do you have a question?
Yeah. First of all, thank you guys for being here. And my question would be, is there any specific sports that you anticipate being harder than others to do from a remote perspective?
I personally haven't had to do baseball or football or softball in a remote situation. But to Ben's point about he's been there, but his support folks have not been there. Football on TV, as you watch a game, the most difficult thing for me is the orientation of the viewer at the tail end of the play, because everything kind of focuses on that tackle area or the end of the play area. And I find it difficult to sometimes even know you have a general idea, but I'm not in generalities. I'm in specifics. You have a general idea where the play ended, but it's difficult. It gets a little dense, a little cumbersome at the time, at that very important tail end of the play. Because when I do football, that's more of a 50-50 when you're on site monitor field kind of thing, because it's so easy to look at the field and get the big picture of things and see exactly where they are. But there are some technicalities that are difficult, and I think football and baseball certainly could lend itself to that as well. The Olympic sports back and forth, as I mentioned, a little bit easier to handle. But I really hope we don't have to do football in a remote situation in a studio, because I'll need a monitor twice the size of what I normally like, and that might be a problem. But Ken, can you help me out with that if need be?
Yeah. I think, for everybody from an announcing perspective, it is going to take a little bit of an adjustment. Like, what Tom said, if you're handing off to the right side and the running back picks up 7 and now he's got 100 yards or whatever, and you don't necessarily have that specific delineation, until, because we're in communication from a control room standpoint, we still have communication from the booth. And I think that this would be the case anyway, even if the announcers aren't there. We're still going to need some statistical reference. And I think there were times last year where, and Ben he's so good at, diagnosing the play, and there were just times where, because there's a little latency issue, you're not really sure, you may have a little bit of a hesitation relative to the angle piece of it. But I know from a producer and director standpoint, if the announcers are not on site, if they're calling off monitor, my tendency may be to just, and I hate doing this because I'm a guy that just wants to show you the best replay the first time. Like I kind of pride myself on that situation, and a lot of the guys in my same position do. And so, but I can tell you, and Ben can attest to this, because I needed to get to it so quickly in order to either kind of tell the play or have the play-by-play person be able to reset the play, I might have just gone to like a high end zone replay as quickly as I could, just because for sure that's going to show, something that he can talk about. And I don't have to second guess myself relative to that. Like, I know I'm safe relative to that. And I probably am just telling him as the play's finishing, I'm either telling him that I'm going to high end zone, or he's telling me that that's where he wants it. So, that's going to be the challenge, you might have to do things a little bit differently. So the nuance of calling it might just be, you'll be able to identify who has the ball or who caught the ball. And then you just, whoever's producing and directing is just going to have to get to that replay a little bit quicker. The analyst jumps in, and then Tom can come in on the backside and say, pick up of 15, 1st and 10, as opposed to trying to maybe do that on the front end.
But even that communication, Ken, is probably not going to have the expediency that it normally has in the booth. And I'm thinking about my spotter, right, Ben? You got a spotter's looking down there. He's got binoculars on, or she, and they have a closer view. If they put binoculars on, if they're next to me in the studio, that's not really going to help. And I rely on the spotter immensely and my statistical person immensely during the course of the game. And that happens like a dance up there. We're all bouncing off one another. If we're all looking at the same monitor, that is going to be very challenging. And Ben, I'm sure you can speak to that as well.
Yeah, I was just going to add in, my job, the way I was described when I first took this job and was learning the craft and the skill, as an analyst, you're supposed to open your eyes and your mind and your worldview as the game is going on. Show the viewer and talk to the viewer and teach the viewers maybe things a lot of times that you don't see on program, because the program's going to follow the ball. And as we all know, the field is big. There's a lot of players, and guys are in different situations. And a guy that maybe, let's just say it was a safety, is going to come and he makes the play, and the viewer is only going to see that safety for about a split second before they make the tackle. But my job as an analyst is to say, all right, on a replay or talk about him, well, it's what he did pre-snap, or here's what they're doing defensively. And this is what maybe the receiver that's out of the screen missed a crack block on an outside linebacker. Those are the things that I'm supposed to look out for to teach the viewer why a play was successful or not successful. And that's going to be really challenging if you have to do things remotely in a studio, because you're not going to have that field view. You're not going to see that all 22 look. And what Ken was saying, in a pinch, when the fail safes are high end zone and all 22. A run play, give me high end zone. If anything else, give me high end zone, and I can talk about something, because there's a lot of stuff that goes on just in the high end zone on a run fit. When it comes to pass situations, you give me an all 22, I can tell you exactly what's going on when it comes to coverages and maybe what the receivers are doing rather quickly. Now, I think you're going to lose out on some of the specific things because of the timing issues. But another thing that I think analysts are going to have to do a better job of, and I'm certainly going to have to do a better job of if we're doing things remote, is maybe just talking more strategy than it is X's and O's. This play happens, maybe it's just a regular routine play, and maybe something you would have had a replay on, but it's more about tying in the story of, well, in the first quarter, maybe they chose to do this, or the defense chose to blitz in this down and distance, but I would look out for X, Y, and Z to happen next. I'm going to predict what's gonna happen, next, or what they should be doing, and do more forecasting as it is just to be in reactionary. And I think we're going to have to do more of that. I know that there's always a balance of that during the game of giving analysis on X's and O's, but also giving you, here's kind of what happened, here's maybe what they should be doing, here's something to look out for. I think we're going to have to do more and more of that, because we're going to have less of the X's and O's and less of the breakdowns.
Good point. Thank you. Bob Behler, you have a question.
Yeah, I do, and this maybe is for the guys on the panel, or maybe a couple guys doing the radio. I know Bruce Howard is on this. Matt LePay was. Steve Cotton from Marshall. If radio has to go remote, we're stuck with what the TV camera shows us if we're sitting in the studio. Ken, you were nodding your head. I know in football that I want to see the big part of the field, because I want to know how many yards somebody's getting. But if you give me a tight one and I'm in the studio, I'm at the mercy of whatever you're showing me. So any thoughts if radio has to go remote? Suggestions?
Yeah, I can address that. This whole industry, in terms of the broadcast piece of it, sans announcers, so producers, directors, technical directors, executive producers, we've been having these Zoom forums for a long time, during this pandemic. And I can't speak for everybody, but I think most of us, if we know going in that television announcers are going to be off-site and radio is going to be off-site, that we're going to create a broadcast environment from a visual standpoint that's going to give the most people the chance for success. So that may mean that our game camera shoots a little bit wider. That may mean that we don't cut to, tight cameras as much, depending on the specific sport. But I feel like, the people that I work with, the colleagues that I have in this environment, that they're all very sensitive to what, everybody is going through. And there'll be dialogue, beforehand, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, to say, hey, I know we might do it this way normally, but, we're not going to do it this way, in this particular instance. So I think we'll be considerate of that. The other piece of this is that if we go an extended time without fans, and we aren't subject to less camera complement, whereas most of the times we try to give the experience to the viewer at home of what it would be like in the venue. So we're oftentimes trying to emphasize fan cutaways and that type of thing, coach cutaways. But if there's no fan involvement relative to the venue, my gut feeling is that those cameras will be deployed, for tactical purposes more so than for fan shots and that type of thing. So even if you don't necessarily see it live, your replay sequence is going to allow you to call something that you might have missed in real time.
And what about audio sounds? Is there a way, if radio's not there, to get the pads popping?
Yeah, I mean, there should be. Again, you'd probably have to work with your individual schools, but that is not a hard technical thing to do. In theory, if the truck is on site, you're getting a feed by XLR into your mixer.
You get that, yeah.
Yeah. And you're in a booth environment. It's really no. Yes, it's not going down a cable. It might be going down a phone line or an IP-based Ethernet connection or something. But that infrastructure will exist. I just encourage you guys to be proactive about, making the request, making it early, and so that folks understand it.
Thank you. John Foki. John, where are you? Did John leave us? Yes. Oops. All right, Bruce Howard, you're up.
I've been involved with Lincoln in a kind of a hybrid remote situation where there have been the play-by-play and the color are in the studio, and then the sideline individual would be on site to get basically everything, ambience and on-site interviews with coaches. It's interesting. Lincoln does a great job. I've been on sidelines doing that. And I would ask Ken, is that a model you've used, or is that a model do you think they'll consider in the future? Because it does give a little bit of a local flavor, and yet you also have the remote element.
Yeah, I think anything and everything is possible. How you execute it. Do you put a wireless lav mic on a coach or a player, and as opposed to a headset? So do they go IFB lav microphone? Do they go headset? There's going to be audio technicians on site. So it's not like, you're not eliminating the technical piece of it. You're just trying to reduce it to where, there's just less people involved on site relative to the production. But yeah, I think whatever you have been used to doing, it's all technically able to continue to do. And I think people will work to try to make that happen. I don't think there's anybody that says, at least, under the pandemic circumstances, I haven't heard anybody say, you need to scale back, you need to try to do it differently, because the viewer, at the end of the day, the end consumer is used to a certain product. They're used to seeing on NASCAR in-car cameras. They're used to seeing interviews with coaches and players. They're used to seeing, graphic presentation. And so, it's really up to sort of technical expertise to try to figure out how to facilitate all of that while keeping people safe.
Thanks. Ben, I know you have to jump. Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll look forward to some of your remote broadcasts and watching.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I've got a young one. I got to get to Taekwondo, so he's got to get ready and get going. So thankfully, we still have some activities going around here in Minneapolis. So thank you all so much. Stay safe, and hope to see you guys down the road.
All right. Thanks again, Ben. Appreciate it.
All right.
Lincoln Rose, you had a comment or two, maybe?
Yeah, just wanted to address a couple of questions. And again, I've been lucky to have people like Bruce and Kelly on the sidelines, and they're instead of me being able to talk directly with coaches right before a game, they've been that representative. Although I think with the coronavirus, I probably resign myself to think that even if I'm on site for half my schedule, I still won't go down to the field necessarily and be that person without symptoms who still manages to accidentally, give these athletes or a coach the virus. Diane asked kind of that sense of honesty of divulging where you are. My philosophy has always just been, I don't bring it up. I feel like it's one more thing to distract the viewer. But I do think with the coronavirus, you might be a little bit more comfortable bringing it up in terms of giving that sense of, well, this is where we are. We're still trying to be as safe, and this is certainly something going on around the world. But for the folks who are on this chat who might be doing play-by-play for the first time off monitors and are any concern, I do think football has a lot more common with volleyball and soccer, where if all you have is program and you're following the ball, you can still perform a B+ and A- broadcast, whereas baseball and softball are the ones where following the ball isn't going to do you much good if you don't know whether the base runners are moving, whether an umpire has signaled something. Baseball and softball are probably a much trickier dynamic, whereas the rest of these you can kind of bite your tongue just long enough to figure out what the true situation is.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Kai, you have some comments for our radio people.
Yes, so I just want to say that I am a remote broadcaster. I cover the Bundesliga for African radio, and I've had quite a few experiences doing remote, especially now in the times of Corona. Basically, in March, when this really got bad, we had no idea what was going to happen next. So when the announcement came in May that it was coming back, we just decided, okay, we're going to just do what we can and give it our best. Now, we get audio pumped in from the stadium. Now, it's not much. Like during my first commentary back, I said it sounds like a high school gym in here, even though the stadium seats 80,000 people. So it was definitely different, but we just said, okay, this is where we are. This is what we're going to do. And we made certain to tell people that we are in a studio because, even though Germany, just to be completely honest here, has handled this quite a bit better than the United States, there are still coronavirus cases going on here. Like there are still several hundred here in this country every single day. So, we're not out of the woods. We're not done yet. But so we've handled the changeover, at least from my perspective. I think we've handled it fairly well, going from live in stadium to remote.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Any questions? Some great questions today. Diane, you had one?
Yeah, I did. There's been a lot of discussion about technology, and I was thinking about so many people getting used to doing remote broadcasting. If some of the experts could comment on what technology they may need to invest in now to be ready to call a game from their home in a couple of months.
Good question.
Ken? Yeah, I mean, I can take that. I would say that if you have a relationship with a broadcaster, they're going to take the initiative relative to the equipment piece of it. There are plenty of sort of podcast centric microphone setups and that type of thing, but because you're still going to need talkback capability, with your control room, wherever that is, my guess, somebody from that network will do that. I will say, and I've done this, we all wear headsets. And I, went to B&H and I bought quote unquote truck comms headsets, so that I don't have to use a headset that somebody else has been using. for the last 15 years, or who knows how long they've been in a truck or a control room or whatever. I did invest in one of those and a couple of extra windscreens. Some people may opt to do that, just have your own sportscaster headset, and you travel with it just like you travel with your laptop. But everything else in terms of like your net return and that type of thing, those are all, it's pretty standard, like a HDMI cable into a computer monitor. But again, I would think that whoever you're working with, even if it's in a collegiate environment, would provide some of that infrastructure.
Thank you. You just cut out at the end there, Ken.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. David Halberstam, you are next and last with a question. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, and just a couple of things that I was a little curious about. First of all, the one point I'm trying to remember who made it. I think it was Tom, and you talked about holding back in terms of not saying who scored, or if you didn't see it, you didn't see it. All you can do is report on it. If you watch Mike Emmerich or any hockey announcer, including the best, often they'll say they score because you don't know who really put it in the darn goal, right? So I think people would appreciate something like that. You can't be, if you didn't see it, you can't make it up. But another issue that just did not come up at all is the fabricated crowd noise. And I'm wondering what will happen around the college game. I know that there's been discussions about this with baseball. And then, Ken, if you could also address, some derivative that will come out of this. I mean, for instance, with the NFL draft, a guy like Roger Goodell, who, if his pants were burning, wouldn't yell fire. We at least saw something about the guy. At least he dug into that darn jar behind him and he sucked up every one of those M&Ms over that weekend. But we learned something about him. And we saw the players and their families respond, right? I mean, is there anything that will come out of it that once the vaccine is out and everybody can travel safely, that will be used as either a cost savings long term or something that was good as an addition?
I can, the natural sound is going to be at a pay grade higher than mine in terms of how that's going to be addressed if there are no fans. Personally, I'm of the opinion that I don't like the fake noise. I mean, I'm obviously a big consumer of soccer around the world, and domestically here, if you're watching the Premier League or the Bundesliga, you're getting that ambient crowd noise, and it does fill out, the viewing experience. But I think it would be just as fine if we just heard the players and the coaches, and those conversations are happening. I just, at this point, I don't have a decision as to how it's going to necessarily be addressed. Every control room is going to be different too. The ability to provide those type of things are going to be based on the technical ability of the specific rooms. In terms of going forward, I mean, we've already seen, the sort of the remote truck paradigm, has definitely shifted. Companies that are, whether they're Fox or ESPN, have invested infinite number of resources in these REMI or at-home production facilities. They're not building $6.5 and $7 million mobile units anymore, and so for sure, that piece of the puzzle is going to increase going forward. That's why on ACC college campuses, so much was committed to control room resources that would allow them to do linear broadcast as well as in stadium shows at the same time. You know, the biggest concern, quite frankly, is how this pandemic is going to impact technical personnel. I don't have any problem saying it. I'm 55 years old. The majority of people that are in my sphere, whether they're producer, director, or camera operators, are certainly over the age of 45. A good number of them, you know, we all came in during the heyday of regional sports networks and kind of the advent of ESPN and their family of networks. And so we're sort of on the back end of our careers. And it's going to be interesting to see how many people stay in it, because I do think the technical staffs are going to be reduced. You're going to see relative to Major League Baseball this year, whereas before you would have a home show production in a mobile unit and a road show production in a mobile unit. That road show infrastructure is gone. You're not going to be able to do that, at least for this season. The same thing is going to be true for Major League Soccer. The same thing's true for the NBA and their Orlando infrastructure. And I think once people find out that you're able to do television in a pretty good way under these circumstances at a reduced cost, I think that's what concerns people that are in my situation. You still are going to have folks like yourselves to call the games. But, you know, I think going forward, you're going to see people in my position where what Tom said, you know, we go to Atlanta and we do volleyball at noon. We do men's soccer at 3:30 and we do women's soccer at 7. And we just crank them out as best we can. And one, you know, the announcers may be on site, or one set of announcers might be just sitting in Atlanta for 10 hours and you just called on them, you know, as best you can. I do think that piece of it, and that is a little bit concerning because it may become dependent on where you live. You know, there may develop hubs of REMI control room infrastructures in certain parts of the country where, at least at the pro sports level, all of these games are going to come back to, you know, whether that's Bristol, Connecticut, or Charlotte, North Carolina, you know, which is happening currently. And if you're not in those places and you're not willing to relocate to those places, it's going to be interesting to see what happens to how many people stay involved in it.
Hey, Ken, don't worry about it. There are over 100 announcers. I know you're not the announcer, but there are over 100 announcers who are 70 years old or over. Al Michaels is 75. Brent Musburger is 81. Marv Albert's trying to hang in there. His voice won't allow him. He'll probably be gone next season. But he's 79, you know? So we got a good life to look forward to. So
yeah.
We need you around there, Ken, for a while.
That's right. I was going to disagree with Ken and say that his greatest triumphs are ahead of him and that I hope I'm there to witness them.
There you go.
There you go.
Hey, I'd like to put in one thing, Dave, real quickly. One thing, I don't know if I got here late, but I don't know if anybody touched on it, but what Ken's remarks really lead to this. The non-revenue sports are going to take a major hit. They're going to get bashed. I see no other way around it. And Ken, what you referred to geographically, I've experienced that already. I worked for the Big Ten Network for 8 years, and their headquarters, as most people know, is in Chicago. It's a bit of a walk from Fairfax, Virginia to Chicago. So I'm no longer working for the Big Ten Network. But what I think you're going to see, sadly, is a real compromise in quality. I mean, you get somebody, it's like asking a player to play 3 games in a single day. the producers, the director, people like Ken, people like us, we put a lot into it. I'm exhausted after I do a game. And to do 2 more on top of it is really hard. And it's going to be a compromise in quality. Plus, there's going to be a cutback in a lot of these sports. My sport, soccer, and just recently, New Mexico, which has been a Final Four team within the last 5 years, Cincinnati, Appalachian State, which has a rich soccer history, they have done away with men's soccer. And it's across the board, things like that are happening. Brown University, an Ivy League school, recently cut 11 teams. Alumni pressure got them to reinstate 2. But you're looking at things where there's going to be a lot of cost saving, cutting costs, reducing the quality, all across the board. You get somebody, Ken's an established producer. He's one of the best. And but if they can get somebody for half what Ken usually charges, you're going to start to see that, especially to save costs, even more so if basketball and football don't generate the revenues. Now, just real quick, I belong to a group called the American Sports Council, and their advocacy is that the non-revenue sports take the Ivy League model, which is no scholarships. And I happen to think that's a good idea, but all the coaches who get scholarships don't want it. The only thing they want less is having their sport removed, which is a possibility. So we're in a real uncharted waters here, and I think we're going to see a lot of compromise and a lot of reduction in quality. And this is something everybody just has to anticipate. It's really, really unfortunate. It's really tough times are coming ahead. You're going to see a major overturn in college sports.
Thank you, Richard. Let's hope it doesn't last long if that does turn out to be true. Our time's up. Thank you very much, Ken Neal and Tom Werme. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody else, for joining us. We'll do another one of these next Thursday. Topic to be determined, so keep your eyes on nationalsportsmedia.org. And again, thanks to our pals at Greater Winston-Salem Inc. for sponsoring this series. Hope everybody has a great weekend. Take care, guys.